Almost exactly 25 years ago, we moved into phase one of this building here in Crown Point. A week or so after we moved in, we got a letter in the mail from our builder indicating that something was awry with the company financially. We quickly determined that the builder had taken financial draws from our account and had not passed them on to the contractors to the tune of nearly $1 million. Now, this was 25 years ago. I'm hoping a quarter century we can sort of talk about a painful moment in our story. Now, it was 25 years ago, so that's more like $2 million in today's dollars and economy. And back then we had maybe 600 people in the church approximately. So this was a very big deal. Such a big deal that the local media and even the national media got a hold of the story. And my mom, for example, was driving down the road in Iowa and heard the story on the news. And as the media often does, they portrayed the church in a most unflattering manner. It was as if we were the cause of the problem instead of the victim of the problem. And we spent many days in the local paper, indeed on the front page of the local paper, in Pearl Harbor font, "Church may lose building." I think they sold some papers with that. The scuttlebutt around the community, as these things often do, kind of take on a life of their own, and the rumor mill kicked in. And for example, I was told that a local church publicly in their services said this happened, that it was God's judgment on our church. Now here's the thing. Most people on the outside probably imagined the church life on the inside as being in disarray. I mean, it must be horrible inside the church. And I can tell you that nothing is further from the truth. When that whole thing went down, it galvanized our church like nothing I've ever seen before, or since probably, in our congregation. We had to come together, and we did in remarkable ways. Those might have been our most unified days that we have ever had in our church. Why is that? Well, what God intends for evil, or what others intend for evil, God intends for good. And here we are a quarter century later, and to this day, I am so proud of how our church and the people of our church responded to one of the biggest crises that we ever went through. How we responded to opposition, slander, and yes, some treachery against us. And here we are now in Nehemiah 4, and Nehemiah 4 describes a similar moment in Israel's story. I would imagine that if you were of the Jewish faith or descent, you probably look back at these times in Israel's story as some of the most remarkably unified in the history of the people and the nation. And indeed, this is a remarkable story. And as we've seen, Nehemiah was cupbearer to the king, the most powerful man in the world, the king of Persia. He hears that the walls of Jerusalem are broken down. He travels 1,000 miles plus, shows up in Jerusalem, tells the people, let's rebuild the walls and rebuild the city. And the people remarkably responded with a unity and said, let's do this thing, and do it they did. In chapter 2, we met three antagonists who have a big role in today's message. Three antagonists in the story: Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem. So Sanballat was the ringleader, Tobiah was like his sidekick, and Geshem was like the behind-the-scenes schemer. pulling strings the whole time. And they are not happy at all that the Jews are rebuilding the walls. And what they do here in Nehemiah 4, and really throughout the rest of the book, follows a familiar pattern. The enemies of God and the enemy of God, Satan, has a playbook. And as we're going to see, this playbook hasn't really changed much in thousands of years. When people oppose the people of God, they follow a similar pattern. And so today we're going to see that pattern, how Nehemiah responded to it, and learn a few things about how we can similarly deal with the challenges and the opposition that we face today. So we're going to get into Nehemiah 4. We're going to work our way through it here. And let's see what these guys do. Verse 1. Now when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, or building the wall, he was angry and greatly enraged. And he jeered at the Jews. And he said in the presence of his brothers and of the army of Samaria, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore it for themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they finish it up in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of rubbish and burned ones at that?" Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him, and he said, Yeah. What they're building, if a fox goes up on it, it'll break down their stone wall. Tobiah wasn't very good at this, and we'll get into that here in a moment, but let's pause right there, okay? So we see here the very first thing is they taunt. They taunt Nehemiah and the Jews. It says here that Sanballat was enraged, okay? Enraged. It literally means in the Hebrew that his entire nose got red. You know somebody's mad when you look at them and their nose is totally red, all the way down to the end. And if you're a Dutchman, that's a long ways. Sanballat is red with rage. And he, quote, jeers the Jews. He says, "These feeble Jews." Now I want you to note something here about taunting. And it doesn't matter if you're in the boardroom or at recess on the playground, there's always a certain little truth to a taunt that is enlarged and is mocked. And this is certainly true here. He notes that they are feeble. And frankly, the Jews are feeble at this point. There's not very many of them. They're essentially a vassal state to the Persian Empire. All they have is sort of this latent memory of back when they were mighty, and David and Solomon, the great days of Israel. All they have is memory of the past. And Sanballat here reminds them of how insignificant they are and how huge the task is. So he's a bully, and he is kind of flexing, kind of doing this number over the Jews and reminding them that they're small. He's saying, "You're weak." And then Tobiah now piles on. And this is, there's not a lot of blatant humor in the Bible, but I think this is actually kind of that. Because here you have Tobiah, and he reminds me of, there's a scene in Karate Kid where the bad guy tells him to sweep the leg. You remember this? And there's this one scene where one of the other guys of that dojo are in the background, and he's just like, "Yeah, he's nothing." I don't know why it comes to my mind, but that's what I think of, because we recently watched it with my girls for the first time, and it just stood out to me like he's like sidekick, piling on. And Tobiah, he says, "If even a fox was on the wall they're building, it would collapse." Now here's the thing. Archaeology shows that the walls that Nehemiah and the people built were 9 feet thick. That's a big fox. I imagine the builders on the wall, when they heard Tobiah, they just sort of smirked a little bit, and I bet Sanballat kind of looked at him and was just kind of like, "Oh, Tobiah." He needed to work on his taunting. But ridicule is a part of how opposition to God's work happens. And it's the easiest form of criticism. Taunting requires no proof. It requires no logic at all. This is why it's common on the elementary playground. So just to walk through it, notice name calling. These feeble Jews, you're weak. He derides their ambition. Will you restore the wall in a day? This project's a joke. He ridicules their optimism. What will they do? Pray the wall up? He mocks their enthusiasm. Are they going to finish this in a day? Sure, they're busy little beavers, but come on, let's be serious here. And then he undermines their confidence. Can they bring the stones back to life? And the insinuation is they can't. They can't. Taunting. Have you ever been taunted? I guess probably in one way or another, most of us have. But spiritual taunting is the next level of it. We think about Jesus, for example. Did Jesus face taunting? My mind went to the moments on the cross. As he hangs on the cross, here's Mark's account. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, "Aha, you who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." So also the chief priests with the scribes mocked him to one another, saying, "He saved others, he can't save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down from the cross so that we may see and believe." And those who were crucified with him also reviled him. This is a common part of the enemy's playbook. And why is that? The Bible says that Satan is a liar and is an accuser. He is the accuser of the brethren. He will find some little thing, some maybe half-truth, and will ridicule us. Perhaps you face some of that this week. What do we do when the enemies of God taunt us and mock us and ridicule us? Well, Nehemiah prayed. Nehemiah prayed. We'll get to that in a moment. I want you to see the second thing in the playbook of the opposition is just flat out treachery and troublemaking. Look at verse 7. But when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the repairing of the walls of Jerusalem was going forward and that the breaches were being closed, they were very angry. And they all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause confusion in it. So they realize the taunting doesn't stop the whole thing, and they go to the next level. And the next level here is to try to confuse the whole enterprise. What can we do to convolute this whole thing and to keep it from happening? There's an old saying, confusion is the devil's playground, and they want to sow confusion. In fact, it says they plotted together. Okay, so this is a concerted effort. These people who probably didn't like each other, but are co-belligerents against the Jews, and they want them out of there. Not a lot's changed, by the way, in a few thousand years. It's relevant to the news today. And so they're plotting together to stop the building. And these are unfamiliar people to us, but these are bad guys. These are not nice people. These are bad guys in the story, and now they're scheming together against Nehemiah, and they're essentially troublemaking, which leads then to threats. Look at verse 11. And our enemies said, "They will not know or see till we come among them and kill them and stop the work." At that time, the Jews who lived near them came from all directions and said to us 10 times, "You must return to us." Okay, let me unpack that now here for what's going on here. Well, they plot together, and apparently they decide we're going to carry on some psychological terrorism. We're gonna carry on some psychological warfare. We're gonna threaten them that at any moment, we're gonna spring out behind the trees and we're gonna kill them all. And so they spread word about this, a kind of guerrilla war. A guerrilla war is a war of attack and surprise. You know, you hide, and then boom, you hit them. That's what they're saying. We're gonna do that to you. You keep building this thing, we're gonna be on you before you know it, and you're gonna be dead a second later. And so they spread the word that this is what they are going to do. Simultaneously, they employ useful idiots. Okay? Useful idiots, you're probably familiar with that term, maybe, I don't know, but it's how people in power manipulate the weak to get them to help on the cause that they're doing. They are useful idiots. And the useful idiots in this story are the Jews who didn't respond to the call to come build the wall in the first place. So they're out in their towns and villages, and these are the people that didn't come to help. Well, the text here says that the Jews who lived near them came from all directions and said to us 10 times, "You must return to us." In other words, these are the family, the friends, the neighbors that now start pouring into Jerusalem, and they start saying to the people up on the wall, "Quit this, come back to us. You know, your field needs attending, your lawn needs to be mowed. Get back home and quit all this nonsense that you're carrying on right now." Which would have a powerful effect if these are people that they lived with and knew, etc. And so think of these wall building Jews, okay? They're up there every day hauling these big blocks and chipping and doing masonry and getting these things back in place. And as they're doing it now, they realize that at any minute there could be a terrorist attack, and they're convinced it's likely gonna come. As they're doing it, people from their hometown are begging them to come home. And not to mention, this work is grueling and the Middle East is hot. Perhaps you've seen pictures of the Middle East. It's very warm. And so guess the result of all of the opposition of Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem, the useful idiots, and the challenge of the work. We get to this point in verse 10 of chapter 4, and the builders are discouraged. The builders are discouraged. Verse 10, "In Judah it was said, the strength of those who bear the burdens is failing. There is too much rubble. By ourselves we will not be able to rebuild the wall." So what happens? Negative chatter begins to make its way around the wall and past the gates, and there's a kind of slowing of the effort and a discouragement that sets in amongst the people. You probably know how this happens. When you're enthusiastic about something, you got a little spring in your step, you're like, "New day, I'm gonna build this wall, come on everybody." And they were making amazing progress. But when discouragement comes and enthusiasm wanes, all of a sudden the most basic task is like, "Oh, this is such a drag. Why am I here another day building this wall?" Husbands, you understand this. How different is walking 2 miles on the golf course compared to walking 2 miles at the mall while your wife shops? Next time you're at the wall, I encourage you to look these poor husbands in the eye. You see them, don't you? Look deep into their eye, and the despair that you see there is the same despair that Nehemiah was noticing in the workers on the wall. They don't seem as excited as they did. And before we were, going a foot a day, now we're hardly moving. And there seems to be less click, 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 donk, 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 bum, 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 going on. What's going on here? Well, friends, mark it down. If the enemy can't defeat us, he's more than happy to discourage us. Maybe that's you here today. Maybe in your life, you're building, okay? You're building your family, you're building your marriage, you're building your career, you're building your education, you're building whatever it is that you are involved in and is a life pursuit for you. Perhaps your faith today is a little wobbly. You're feeling overwhelmed by the task ahead. Maybe you're in the middle laps. The middle laps, no matter what you're doing, are the worst laps. The first laps, you're excited to get going. The last laps, you can see the finish line. We all despair in the middle laps of any enterprise. And maybe you're in the middle laps of whatever it is that you are building. And maybe even your faith. Maybe you're not a new Christian, maybe you're not an old Christian, you're in the middle laps of your faith. The enthusiasm you had when you started and the enthusiasm you'll have when you end ain't there now in the middle laps. You might be feeling discouraged. Maybe there's a besetting sin, a habit you can't break. Somebody criticizing you. And I would just say to that, life is hard. Have you noticed? Life is hard. Now, young people right now, you don't get that. Okay? But I'm here to tell you, life is hard. And I don't have as many laps under my belt as some of the old people here. And they're all the ones laughing right now. I'm definitely in the middle laps. But life is hard. And this is one reason that the Bible praises faithfulness. It's hard to stay faithful, especially those middle laps. Hard to stay faithful. Sometimes it feels like we put 3 bricks up and 2 fall off. Sometimes you put 3 bricks up and 10 fall off. And you look back on the week and you're like, that was a waste. Maybe you feel that way today. Do you have a week like that? Did your boss criticize you? Maybe your car didn't work. Maybe you think a family member thinks you're a loser. And essentially you just want to go howl at the moon, but you decided to come to church instead. Right choice. But you're discouraged. I want you to imagine being Nehemiah in all of this. He's the leader. He is the one that people are looking to. His words set the whole thing in motion in the first place. Think about how discouraged Nehemiah could have been, and the appeal of just saying, you know what, great effort everyone, but I'm going back to Susa. I'm going back to the palace. I'm going to go back, hang out with Artaxerxes. They like me there, and it's quite nice. I'm just tired of all of this. And he could have done that, certainly. So how should faithful Christians handle the taunts, the threats, the terrorism, and the troubles that life and oftentimes the enemy puts in our path? And I want you to see how Nehemiah handled it. He handled it right. So here's a guide to handling opposition, if you're taking notes. The first thing is to expect it. Christian, we need to expect it. I start with this because I think one of the keys to handling opposition is to manage our expectations, especially if you're a leader of any kind. If you're involved in leadership, business, school, little league team, it doesn't matter what it is, expect it. And now, I'll admit there's not a verse here saying Nehemiah expected trouble. It doesn't say that. But we know that he had a 1,000-mile journey to think about how this was all going to go down. And there's no way a guy of his caliber thought to himself, I'm just going to show up in Jerusalem. I know that it's been 100 years since anybody's done any movement on these stones, but I'm going to say a few things, and everyone's going to rally, and we're going to build it, and there's going to be a party. No way. And things never go that way. He arrived in Jerusalem expecting opposition. And yet his whole response is so balanced and intentional and faith-filled. This is a guy who understood that change brings opposition. You know, over the years, I have cried on some shoulders in difficulties that I've had in pastoral ministry, including my own dad. And my dad, who was raised in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan on a dairy farm, who was up at like 4 doing chores for a couple hours, and every night doing chores when he came home, and tells stories of working all summer in the blazing sun and all of that. When I cry on his shoulders, his often response is, did somebody say this would be easy? Is that sympathy? I don't think that's sympathy. Not to pick on the Dutch twice, but they're not known for their great sympathy. But there is a truth there. Did somebody tell you that your life and following Jesus was going to be easy? Is that your expectation somehow? Have you skipped the verses that tell us that those who follow Christ can expect persecution? Just kind of edit those out? We'd like to, because we don't like that. But we must expect it. Here's Chuck Swindoll. There will always be opposition from those who are by nature negative and critical. But the work must go on. Progress should not stop because a few were critical of the plan. Friend, I want you to realize that the Christian life and life in a local church, it's just naive to think it's going to be, happy all the time. There are going to be troubles and there are going to be challenges in your life and in the life story of our church. I told you one from 25 years ago. And there's been many since, and there's many that lie ahead. And as church members and as Christians, we shouldn't be surprised when there is trouble in a broken world like we have. It's going to be this way. And every leader of note in the Bible faced it. Nehemiah faced it, and Moses faced it, and David faced it, and Jeremiah faced it, and the Apostle Paul faced it, and Jesus faced it, and the early church faced it, and you're going to face it as well. You will not be defined by facing opposition, but by how you respond to it. And here we see Nehemiah with a kind of resolve that no doubt displayed an understanding of the world and the enemies of God, that this is the way it's going to be. He's not shocked. In fact, I'll note to you that it was God's will didn't allow the wall to be built without opposition. Realize that God is sovereign over the enemies as well. And he could have very easily said, I want this wall built, and it's going to be a happy day every day until they get it done. He didn't do that. It was his will for Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem to be in there doing their nastiness. And I think this is counterintuitive to us. We all have this latent memory of the Garden of Eden. We want it back. You know, that time, the ancient past, when everything was perfect and everybody got along, and the lion lay down with the lamb, and everything was copacetic between Adam and Eve, and between Adam and Eve and God. And we long for this Garden of Eden again, and so we are perpetually disappointed in life. And I think it's better to be realistic and to understand that Genesis 3 happened, and the world has never been the same since Genesis 3. And we live in the effects of that. And the coming year in our church will display the effects of that. And your life will display the effects of that. And in the church, we can long for the blissful church. Oh, the church. We love our church. We love the church of Jesus. Oh, it's so great to be a Christian where the deer and the antelope play, and where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all day. That's not Indiana. We're happy for you Florida people again. The Sunshine State. Life never delivers that. Think of the disappointment looming in the next 7 days until the church gathers again, represented in the room here today. Big and small, massive disappointments. Life not as I expected it would be. Better to expect than to be discouraged. Don't let it discourage you. We see that the opposition was part of God's will. Nehemiah was doing God's work God's way, and he faced opposition for it. To quote former Moody Bible Institute President Joe Stoll, he said once, "In every church I have pastored, God has placed difficult people around me to keep me dependent on him." I don't know how I got the one church without any of that. Just lucky, I guess. But that is true. Why is that opposition there? If I can expect it and see it as part of God's will, but why is it there? To keep us dependent on him. And this week at your HOA meeting, there's going to be a knucklehead. And this week at your homeschool or home room mom gathering, there's going to be a tyrant. And this week, in the week ahead, your family, extended family or otherwise, is going to have some drama of some kind. We must see opposition as part of God's plan. In fact, even God faces opposition. Have you heard of Satan? Now, a little caveat here. While it is God's will for there to be Sanballats, it is never God's will for us to be a Sanballat. May I say that again? Because some of you are going to walk out of here, I'm going to do our church a favor. We need more Sanballats around here. No, we don't, okay? No, we don't. If your nose is often red, if you are quick to mock other people's wall building, if you are quick with a critical or a slanderous tongue, I want to say to you that God uses Sanballats, but he doesn't endorse them. I'm just saying better to expect them and make sure that we're not one of them. Amen? Now, I know the Sanballats right now are thinking to themselves, I'm not amening that. He didn't say it right. Do I see some red noses here? Rudolph? Any? All right, so expect it, okay? First thing. Secondly, and here's where Nehemiah is so remarkable, he prays over it. Look at verse 4. Hear, O our God, for we are despised. Turn back their taunt on their own heads and give them up to be plundered in a land where they are captives. Do not cover their guilt, and let not their sin be blotted out from your sight. For they have provoked you to anger in the presence of the builders. Well, now that's some kind of prayer, isn't it? I want you to see, though, he prayed. Our instinct is to counterpunch, right? We want to punch. Nehemiah prays. He prays, and so should we. Pray over the opposition. Pray for the opposition. Pray for Sanballat and Tobiah. I've actually found that to be a helpful thing with the Sanballats that I've faced over the years, is I pray for them and it kind of softens my heart and tones down my anger. Pray for them. Now, what Nehemiah prays for them, I would leave for Nehemiah to do. He prays what's known as an imprecatory prayer. And the Psalms have a number of imprecatory prayers. It's basically where you're praying for justice against opposition, but the language is super strong. May they be plundered in a land where they are captives. That doesn't sound very loving, does it? It's very strong. So pray strong prayers. Pray. Some of you right now are facing opposition. Have you prayed over it? Have you prayed over them? Pray. Secondly, notice that Nehemiah prepares to oppose the opposition. And this is verses 13 and following. It's a long section. I'm not going to read all of it, but just to note some of the practical things that Nehemiah does. Here's a summary. He basically turns Nehemiah into an armed camp. Like everybody's got weapons, everybody's armed to the teeth, a practical step with spears and swords. It says that he put armed guards at the low spots in the wall. Why do you think he would put them in the low spots of the wall? That's kind of a practical thing, isn't it? Where would it be easy for them to jump over in the night and get amongst them? It's the low spots, not the high spots. He had workers work with chisel in one hand and sword in the other. Did that slow them down? For sure it did, but they kept the work going. He walks around the gates every day with a trumpeter. And the rule was, if you heard the trumpet, everybody knew, go to where the trumpet's blowing and bring your sword because we're bringing the fight to them. He had a plan. He had all the people stay inside the city, verse 22. An excellent summary, and frankly, one of my favorite verses in Nehemiah, and one of my favorite verses in the Bible, is verse 9. So I'm going to just sit on this one a little bit. Look at what it says. And we prayed to our God, and set a guard as a protection against them day and night. You're like, that doesn't warrant being one of your favorite verses. Oh wait, it does. Notice he prayed and he set a guard. Okay, this is Nehemiah like in a microcosm. He is filled with faith. His instinct is to pray. He prays and he prays, but he also sets a guard, which is kind of a practical, prudent thing to do, don't you think? And this to me is Nehemiah. I mentioned this earlier, that he prayed and he prepared. I said he prepared. Here's an example of preparing. Nehemiah prays. Notice the order. He prays first. That's the right priority. But prayer doesn't turn us passive. It's not like, I'm just going to pray about it. Nehemiah could have said that. We're just going to pray about it. And then they would have all been destroyed. No, he prayed about it and he did something about it. And that is faith as well, friends, okay? Prayer doesn't turn us passive. I remember years ago, many years ago, there was a woman in our church, she came down with cancer. And she says to me, I'm just gonna pray over it. And I said, that's great, pray over it, but you should seek medical attention for this. They might be able to treat it, they might be able to slow it, they might be able to help it. And she refused and said, I am only going to pray about it. And I preached her funeral. And I remember to this day, that's like, it sounds spiritual, doesn't it? I'm just gonna pray about it. But faith includes practical steps. And Nehemiah does this. Your finances tight? Pray about it. And maybe get a second job. Okay? You trying to decide what college to go to? Pray about it and maybe meet with the financial aid department. You want to marry a godly Christian spouse? Pray and get involved in a gospel church. You want to reach people for Christ? Pray and share the gospel with somebody that you know. In other words, prayer doesn't replace practical wisdom. In fact, I find oftentimes when I pray, I get practical wisdom. Have you noticed that? So I would encourage us to be a church that prioritizes prayer, yes, and practical wisdom and being prudent. And we see Nehemiah doing that, okay? Finally, okay, here's our guide to what he does. This one perhaps most important. Verse 14. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. Nehemiah, they're discouraged. The work's slowed. There's not as much banging and clanging going on. He looks in the eyes and he sees discouragement and despair. He knows there's scheming out there, Sanballat and Tobiah. He hears the local people coming in and saying, come home, forget this. What does he do? He points the people to God. He says, remember the Lord. Remember what he is like. He is great and he is awesome. Remember the Lord. Because in the end, friends, you can have all the practical wisdom, you can set all the guards, you can have all the swords and all the spears and all the rest. But in the end, it is the will of God that stands. And we must remember our God and bring to bear in the difficulties and the opposition and the discouragement the reality that there is a God in the universe. And I know him by faith in his son, Jesus Christ. And he promises that he loves me and that everything works together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. To bring to bear into the practicalities of life that there is a God. As Psalm 46, God is our hope and refuge. Is that true? What are you thinking about with the opposition and troubles in your life? Are you thinking about God? Is God in the formula somehow? He is our refuge and our hope, an ever-present help in time of need. Therefore, we will not fear though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the sea. And when the Sanballats come and mock and scoff and ridicule, when it seems like the enemy is winning and the work is waning, remember the Lord. And I say that because I know your struggle is like my struggle in the day-to-day life. It's easy to kind of operate according to a sort of functional atheism, where I'm dealing with troubles and I'm dealing with opposition, but I'm just problem solving. I'm trying to figure it all out on my own. I'm depending on me. I can do this. And I'm not remembering the Lord. And so I am often discouraged, especially when life is painful. Recently, I experienced some discouragements. And truly, I was in a rotten mood. What did I do? One thing that helped me is I thought, God is sovereign over this too. I can trust him. I had to remember the Lord, who holds my life in his hands, who loved me before the foundations of the world, who numbered my days before I was even born, who knows the hair on my head and the thoughts before they're on my tongue. The God who sent Jesus to die on the cross for my sins. And if he sent him, will he not also give me everything else I need? The God who guarantees that I will spend forever on the new heaven and the new earth. That God cares for me. I got to remember the Lord. I got to bring him into the formula and factor it into my life. To realize that this hand that holds my life is a loving hand. It is a nail-pierced hand. It is a powerful hand. It's a hand that understands, because even Jesus, in the troubles that he faced, had to remember the Lord. 1 Peter 2:23, when he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him, his heavenly Father, who judges justly. Hebrews 12:3, consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. Remember the Lord, Bethel Church. Remember the Lord.
Thank you.
Now, I started this whole message with a 25-year-old story of our church and a major trial that we went through. I want to tell you the rest of the story. The rest of the story is that we went through financial and legal troubles with that. We tried to do what was right, and we got through it. It was very expensive for many, many years, but we got through it. We came together as a church family. And for a quarter century now, this facility has served 1,300 Sunday gatherings of worship and Bible preaching like we're experiencing here today, okay? I'm not done, hold on. Over 9,000 days of ministry, counseling, Bible studies, children's ministries, 25 summers of vacation Bible school for kids, and a remarkable story of growth and development by the grace of God as a local church. In fact, if I do my math right, over the last 25 years, some 3 million or more people have walked through these doors since that opposition started. Amazing. Now, 25 years ago, it was hard. And those of you that were here, you remember how hard it was. It was very hard. But the hard helped make us who we are today. What they intended for evil, God intended for good. He always does. Amen.